The most insane twist in a shocking case out of Houston, Texas. Let's talk about it. On the night of Monday, October 7th, 2024, a 911 dispatcher in Houston, Texas received a call from a man who said that his wife had tried to exit this world on her own terms. The man's name was Lee Gilley. He was 38 years old, a self-employed software consultant, and he lived with his wife, Krista, and their 2 young children in a home about 4 miles northwest of downtown, a house that they had lived in for more than 7 years. He told the dispatcher that Krista had taken too much of something. He said that he had gone to bed after they had an argument and that 3 hours later he woke up and found her in bed unresponsive. On the phone, he told the dispatcher that he was performing CPR as he waited for help to arrive. The call was made just before midnight. Once officers with the Houston Police Department arrived, they walked into the scene along with Houston Fire Department medics. What they found was a 38-year-old woman, Krista Gilley, unresponsive on the floor. She was 9 weeks pregnant with the couple's 3rd child. Paramedics worked quickly and they transported her to a local hospital. 3 hours later, approximately around 2:30 in the morning on October 8th, Krista was pronounced deceased. At that point, as far as what the initial responders knew, what they were dealing with was absolutely tragic and self-inflicted. Lee Gilley's story was they had an argument, they said goodnight off to bed, and then he made an awful discovery. He was presenting himself to be this grieving husband. He made the 911 call himself. There were no obvious signs of anything really at the crime scene, at least not the kind that you would see immediately in the dark showing signs that there was a murder. But the hospital staff saw something that the paramedics had not yet fully processed, because when Krista Gilley arrived at Memorial Hermann, medical personnel noted bruising on her face and what they described to be apparent trauma. Injuries, they told detectives, that were inconsistent with anything that she would have done herself. Injuries that were inconsistent from doing intense CPR. Injuries instead that were consistent with the cause of death being strangulation. And very quickly, authorities started to pay very close attention to the husband, Lee Gilley's odd behavior. But to understand what happened that night on October 7th, 2024, you have to understand who Krista was before she became Krista Gilley. She grew up in South Carolina in a tight-knit, family-centered community outside of Charleston, where, as one of her closest friends would later say, her family were pillars of the community. She was the older sisters out of her sisters, and she wore that title very proudly. She has been described as the type of person who showed up for every single person that she loved in her life, and as someone who had this magnetic personality about her that drew people in. She graduated from Somerville High School in 2004, and she went on to earn a degree from Clemson University, eventually becoming a doctor of physical therapy. She worked as a physical therapist and a researcher at a hospital in Houston. She published academic articles in scientific journals, and she taught as a professor as well. She was, by all accounts, an outstanding woman. Quote, she was really fun. She was just so good at her job and everything else that sometimes people forget just how silly she could be and how fun she was to be around. It was at university that Krista first met Lee Gilley. They reconnected years later for a second date, and then the rest was history. They got married. Lee was working as a software engineer. Krista loved and excelled at her job, and they settled into a good neighborhood. They had 2 children, one in 2020 and their second one in 2022, and they built what a lot of people would call the dream life. They had a 3rd child on the way, and it felt like they were at a very, very exciting point in their life. But what was happening inside of that home is something that only Lee Gilley knows for certain. What we do know is that the evidence would eventually suggest that this picture they put out to their friends and family about their marriage and their life was very different from the life that they were actually living. 2 days after Krista Gilley was pronounced deceased, a pathologist completed her autopsy, and the findings completely and absolutely demolished Lee Gilley's story. The official ruling of Krista's death was ruled as a homicide caused by compression of the neck and upper back, consistent with manual strangulation. The autopsy also confirmed what the hospital had already noted, that Krista had visible bruising and trauma to her face. And it also confirmed that she was approximately 9 weeks pregnant at the time of her death, meaning that not only was she taken from the world way too soon, but the chance of welcoming a healthy, beautiful baby into the world was also no longer. The medical examiner's report was filed on October 9th. That same day, Lee Gilley was officially a suspect. 2 days later, on October 11th, 2024, an arrest warrant was issued for him, and HPD homicide detectives moved to execute it. He was taken into custody and booked into the Harris County Jail on a charge of capital murder. Specifically murder in the course of committing multiple murders, because prosecutors recognized that their unborn child constituted a second victim under Texas law. Capital murder in Texas carries 2 possible sentences: life in prison without parole or the death sentence. Lee Gilley pleaded not guilty. On October 17th, a judge set his bond at $1 million. On October 21st, he posted bail and he walked out of jail. He was placed on house arrest with a GPS ankle monitor, ordered to surrender his U.S. passport, barred from contacting his children or Chris's family, and required to maintain a strict curfew. He was just one out of 24 capital murder defendants in Harris County free out on bond pending trial, and his trial was originally scheduled for May 29th, 2026. So days after Krista's death, a lot of people gathered together for a vigil in her honor. At the same time, in Summerville, South Carolina, a group of 8 lifelong friends, women who had grown up with Krista, formed an organization they called Justice for Krista. Purple ribbons were spread across town. A GoFundMe campaign was launched to help the family cover legal costs, travel expenses, and the ongoing burden of supporting Krista's 2 young children. Quote, "We started organizing to honor her and keep her memory and legacy alive. We hope to continue to do that beyond the criminal case and into the future," end quote. And back in Harris County, the prosecution began building their case, and what they were finding went well beyond the night of October 7th. Court filings from the pre-trial phase revealed a picture of a marriage that was quietly falling apart long before the night of the murder. Prosecutors alleged that in 2023, a full year before her death, Lee Gilley had engaged in a physical affair with a woman from San Diego, California. And on March 18th, 2024, just 7 months before the murder, someone using a Reddit account prosecutors believed to have been Lee Gilley posted that he was, quote unquote, bored in his marriage and, quote, seeking a college-aged female for a friends with benefits arrangement, end quote. Krista, at that point, was likely already pregnant or just about to get pregnant, so she was preparing for the arrival of her 3rd child. Her husband, allegedly, meanwhile, was soliciting strangers on the internet. The prosecution obviously saw that as a clear motive, but the defense was offering a different explanation. They claimed that Lee did not hurt his wife. They claimed that he loved his wife, arguing instead that she passed away from a medical condition called hemoglobin anemia, which they claimed could mirror the same physical symptoms of what could look like a strangulation. But before the trial could even begin, Lee Gilley fled. He ran away. He escaped. He left the U.S. On the morning of May 1st, 2026, just 28 days before his murder trial was scheduled to begin, Lee Gilley allegedly cut off his GPS ankle monitor. He landed at an airport in Italy on May 3rd, but border police detained him after he presented a forged Belgian passport and other documentation identifying him under a completely different name. But what he didn't say, and what authorities would later find out, was that this flight and him leaving the country was something that he had been planning for months. Between April and May of 2025, a full year before he fled, Lee had allegedly been in contact with the same California woman with whom he was accused of having an affair with back in 2023. According to prosecutors, the two of them had been having conversations discussing plans to flee to different countries. He had raised the possibility of marrying her to obtain a completely new identity. He had asked her whether he knew of a Mexican identity that he could assume. This entire escape, prosecutors allege, was not a panicked decision that he made in the final days before the trial. It was something done on purpose and previously calculated. Once he found himself in Italian custody, facing being sent back to the US, that's when he finally revealed who he really was. Lee Gilley eventually confessed his identity and told authorities that he was awaiting trial back in the United States for the murder of his wife, still the entire time claiming that he was innocent. Now here's the thing, Italy has banned the death penalty and they will not extradite someone who could be facing the death penalty back to the US. So as for the time being, Lee Gilley remains in custody in Italy. The Harris County District Attorney's Office has confirmed that a formal extradition request has been submitted to the Italian government, but a decision has not yet been made. His trial in Harris County was rescheduled to June 5th, but is now pretty much on hold, contingent on his return back to the States. And whether Italy will send him back or not remains an open legal question with no guaranteed timeline at all. Because it sounds like under the 1983 US-Italy extradition treaty, Italy cannot surrender him without having binding written assurance from the U.S. Department of Justice that the death penalty will not be sought out, and Harris County prosecutors have still not publicly declared whether they intend to pursue it or not, so we would just have to wait and see. And the latest update that I could find as far as the kids aged 3 and 5 is that they are currently still in the care of their maternal grandparents, but it sounds like there is a confusing and complicated custody situation still active. I just hope that Krista's parents are able to keep them in the safest environment that they can. Yeah, insane. And also him fleeing the country and having have planned it beforehand on top of the affair screams guilty to me. But that is all I have. Let me know if you guys are keeping up with this as well. Let me know if there's any information that you think that I should have said that I forgot to mention. But yeah, that's it for me today. Thank you for spending time with me today and for listening to Krista's story. Hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the foreheads, every single one of you.